waiting for Gundam in the sun. Kind host, then long queues, robots fight, peach drink in hand, home for pies, not joy. Polite path, the price and pace of passage. Our post-Doraemon glow, a pleasant buzz from a day spent with futuristic cats and simulated kart racing, began to fade as we stood on the curb outside the Hotel Universal Port Vita. What's the most humbling part of any grand vacation? It's not the jet lag or the foreign currency, it's realizing you and your mountain of luggage are just a logistical problem in need of a solution. For us, that solution was a Go Taxi app and a spotless black Toyota sedan. The driver, a man in a crisp uniform and white gloves, bowed slightly as we piled in. Then came the question. It's a question you'll hear in almost any Japanese cab, and it sounds suspiciously simple. Kosoku doro o tsukaimasu ka? He was asking if we wanted to take the expressway. This was not a conversation about the scenic route. This was a business proposition delivered with the politeness of a sermon. He was not just our driver. He had momentarily become our financial advisor, and this Toyota was his mobile office. Right here, suspended between the world of Mario Kart and our next hotel, we were being offered a classic time versus money conundrum. The reason for the question is both painfully simple and deeply revealing. Japanese highways have tolls, and those tolls are your responsibility, an extra line item on the final bill. By asking, our driver was performing a small, sacred act of financial transparency. He was laying his cards on the table, offering us a premium service, speed, for a listed price, preventing the awkward moment at the end where you stare at the meter and wonder if the cab fare includes a down payment on the vehicle. This is not an experience I've had in many other world capitals, where the scenic route often feels less like an offer and more like an involuntary city tour funded entirely by you. Opting for the local roads, of course, saves you the toll. It also subjects you to a journey through a labyrinth of surface streets, traffic lights, and intersections that make a snail's progress seem ambitious. The expressway, for a few extra yen, lets you bypass all that. It's the anywhere door from Doraemon's pocket, only this version charges a fee and doesn't drop you directly into your bathtub. Choosing the expressway wasn't just about saving 10 minutes, it was about buying our way out of 1,000 tiny frustrations. This simple question is a working model of omotenashi, the Japanese concept of hospitality that anticipates a guest's needs. The driver doesn't presume to know your priorities. Are you a high flyer with a plane to catch or a penny pincher on a budget? He empowers you with the choice. It's a level of respect for the customer that feels both ancient and refreshingly modern. Click. The meter stopped early as he rolled into the hotel porte-cochere. He handed us the receipt with a bow, every charge clearly itemized. The transaction was over, clean and clear, another small, well-oiled piece of a large, complex machine. The art of anticipation. Omotenashi beyond the taxi rank. That question from our Japanese cabbie, To, about the highway, was more than a choice between speed and thrift. It was the tip of a very polite, very efficient iceberg. I was starting to understand that this kind of interaction is rooted in a concept called omotenashi, a form of selfless hospitality so deeply ingrained it makes you wonder if the entire country attended a masterclass in preemptive helpfulness. It's a philosophy of anticipating needs you haven't even processed yourself, all delivered with genuine warmth and zero expectation of a tip. It's like discovering you've been assigned a team of invisible butlers for the duration of your trip. The first place you'll notice this is in a store. Buy a single, sad-looking pencil, and they will wrap it with the precision and ceremony of a state secret. The cashier doesn't just hand you your purchase, they present it, often after giving it a final, searching look for any microscopic flaw you'd never find in a million years. Clerks maintain a respectful distance while you browse, yet somehow materialize the instant a question flickers across your brain like helpful apparitions summoned by your own confusion. Then they might walk you to the door and bow as you leave, a gesture that feels disproportionate to your purchase of a beverage and a bag of shrimp-flavored chips. In restaurants, the performance continues. You are seated and immediately presented with an oshibori, a hot towel that serves as a refresh button for your face and hands. The service staff operate with a quiet efficiency that borders on telepathy. Your water glass is never empty, yet you rarely see anyone fill it. If you return to a small place, they might remember not just your face, but your order, which is both flattering and a little bit frightening. The food itself arrives arranged with such artistic balance, it feels less like a meal and more like a temporary installation. My thoughts were tangled like thorny vines as I tried to reconcile this quiet care with the performative friendliness I was used to back home. But the grand stage for omotenashi is the traditional inn, or ryokan. The moment you arrive, the staff greets you as if your visit is the sole reason for the establishment's existence. After a detailed tour of your room, you're left with a cotton kimono or yukata and a small seasonal suite. You go to dinner, and when you return, a fluffy futon has materialized on the tatami mat floor, laid out by what I can only assume are a team of highly trained silent ninjas specializing in bedding. In the morning, it's gone. Vanished just as mysteriously. It's a collective dedication to making life run smoothly. The impeccable cleanliness of public restrooms, the clear signage, the willingness of a total stranger to help a lost tourist, it all adds up. I found myself developing a new travel game, trying to spot a crack in the system, a single moment of indifferent service. It became a quiet obsession. A hunt for one grumpy clerk or a lazily wrapped item. I never won. The entire country seemed committed to making my journey effortless, one thoughtful gesture at a time. Sun-Scorched Standstill, a study in stoic spectators. After a deep dive into omotenashi, Japan's profound concept of selfless hospitality, one question naturally arises. What happens when that beautiful anticipatory service collides with its mortal enemy, the queue for a world's fair? The answer, it turns out, is that the queue wins. Decisively. Today was supposed to be the main event of our Japanese adventure, the Expo, and it began, as all great undertakings do, with a monumental miscalculation. We arrived at 8 o'clock for a 9 o'clock opening, a move we felt was strategically brilliant. Our prize was an hour spent sitting directly in the sun, which, despite the pleasant sea breeze and a temperature allegedly in the high 60s, felt like being slow-roasted for a science experiment. Japan, a country with a great many people, seemed to have designated this specific day for a national field trip. We'd been to the Expo in Dubai, an event that was certainly crowded but had the decency to provide covered walkways and other such luxuries. Here the approach was more stoic. The Japanese seemed to possess a genetic predisposition for standing in long lines, an acceptance of orderly suffering that was on full display. The line for any given pavilion was a 1-hour investment. The queue for France, for reasons I will never comprehend, looked like a 3-hour commitment to see what? A slightly superior baguette. When we finally shuffled past security, I was struck by who was doing all this waiting. The crowd was a slow-moving glacier of sensible shoes and sun hats. It appeared that every nursing home in the Kanto region had coordinated a mass outing. I was genuinely amazed by the sheer number of very elderly people, and even more so by their fortitude. They navigated the sprawling grounds in the growing heat with a quiet determination that suggested this wasn't their first rodeo. It was as if we had stumbled upon the final trials for an Olympic endurance team. Their ability to manage the heat and the slow, shuffling march was not unimpressive. Mobile Suit Gundam, more than just giant robots. After a morning spent baking in the sun among what felt like the entire retired population of southern Japan, did our fortunes at the expo improve? In a way. The park's entry system includes a lottery that grants you a fast pass to select pavilions, but as we soon learned, winning this lottery is like getting a wish from a particularly vindictive genie. I had also made a strategic error born of pure morning ambition. I stacked my 5 selections early in the day, only to have the system award us a random smattering of times and locations, the first of which required us to immediately trek across the entire man-made island. Our punishment march began. The whole expo site is encircled by a gigantic wooden ring, which looks less like a marvel of engineering and more like a woodworking project that got wildly out of hand. Apparently, it is a new construction method where countless 2x4s are glued together with modern adhesives to be as strong as steel. All I knew was that it was a very, very long ring, and we were walking along a significant portion of its circumference to get to something called the Gundam Pavilion. On this long walk, we ducked into the tiny European Union Pavilion for a moment of shade. It was surprisingly cool, featuring some tech and a small collection of plants you were encouraged to interact with. An attendant explained that touching the flora would trigger different displays on a screen. As an American, my first instinct was to grab a leaf and see what it could really take. But drawing upon my years of acquired European sophistication, I began by delicately caressing a leaf tip. The attendant watched me for a second before politely instructing me to be a little more violent with the vegetation. Finally, a cultural interaction I was born for. We eventually reached the Gundam Pavilion. You might think a franchise about giant fighting robots is simple kids' stuff, but in Japan, it's a cultural institution. Gundam basically invented the real robot genre in 1979, which was a startling shift from the superhero robots of the time. Instead of being powered by heroism and shouting, these mobile suits were mass-produced weapons of war. They ran out of ammo, required repairs, and their pilots were often traumatized soldiers, not invincible heroes. It was as if someone decided to write a war story where the tanks just happened to be shaped like 60-foot-tall men. This commitment to gritty realism is why, decades later, I was standing in a line to ride a fake space elevator. The experience itself was a charmingly chaotic simulation. We rode the elevator, got attacked by an evil Gundam, and had to escape in a pod while giant robots fought all around us. It was a fine piece of manufactured peril. From there, we went to our next lottery win, the Mitsubishi Pavilion. After the high drama of intergalactic war, this exhibit was dedicated to a more grounded vision of robotics. We saw various machines, including one with clever suction cup hands that could pick up just about anything. And in a city whose culture gave the world instant noodles and conveyor belt sushi, a robot that could just quietly and perfectly pick things up felt profoundly and, appropriately, Osakan. Futile forms, cues, creatures, and a quashed quest. That crushing wall of humanity we'd faced upon entry had taught us a valuable lesson in expo survival. Aim low. Our grand ambitions of seeing the future were quickly downgraded to a more practical goal of fiending a pavilion that wouldn't require us to age a full calendar year in line. We struck gold, relatively speaking, with Qatar. A mere 20-minute wait granted us entry into a building shaped like a dhow, a tribute to the nation's history of pearl diving. This felt like a monumental victory. Next door, the UAE pavilion featured a hall of pillars that looked like fossilized palm fronds. Nearby, we observed another country's building, a metallic structure whose entire skin seemed to be gently, constantly vibrating, as if it were deeply worried about its mortgage, victorious and unnerved. We sought sustenance. The official drink of the Expo was Pepsi Zero Peach, a beverage that tasted like it was concocted by a marketing committee that had only ever heard peaches described over a bad phone connection. This was paired with a giant hot dog possessing the structural integrity of a wet sponge. It wasn't just bad. It was a profound, almost architectural failure of a sausage. Fueled by chemical peach and profound disappointment, we discovered a new strategy. We gravitated toward the section for nations that clearly had other priorities, like funding their healthcare systems. These pavilions, for countries like South Sudan and Kosovo, were housed together in a vast, shared warehouse, the international equivalent of a group project where nobody did the reading. There was no wait at all. We walked right in past scattered exhibits and a few interesting robots with sucker cup hands, a feature I assume is useful for picking up very specific, very smooth objects. It was in here, amidst the quiet hum of national branding on a budget, that we encountered the Expo's soul. It was a face, or rather, a collection of eyeballs embedded in a ring of what looked like living water, which had somehow befriended a lumpy, red, cell-like creature. This was Miyaku Miyaku, the official mascot for the 2025 World Expo. Forget cute and cuddly. This thing was a biological curiosity, a surrealist painting given life and a marketing budget. I can't help but imagine the pitch meeting. So it's a sentient water loop, a brave designer says, and it pals around with a friendly amoeba. The name, Miyaku Miyaku, means the continuous passing down of knowledge. The eyes symbolize connecting with the world. The executives, perhaps terrified, perhaps mesmerized, just nod slowly and approve $1 billion worth of merchandise. The Japanese have a term for this, kimo kawaii, or grotesque cute. Miyaku Miyaku wasn't just weird, it was a statement. It was a bizarre, unforgettable symbol for an event about the future of life itself. But even a creature born from the unification of cells and water cannot defeat the raw power of a hot afternoon. Our original plan to spend the entire day exploring the future had dissolved. The gap between the gleaming vision of the Expo and the reality of trudging across scorching pavement had become too wide. We were hot, we were tired, and our forward progress had ceased. We surrendered, retreating to the air-conditioned bliss of our hotel. On the metro ride back, a television screen seemed to stretch down the tunnel forever, an endless digital mirage. We ordered pizza, we collapsed, and we prepared for an early night. Our tour of the future society concluded with the timeless comfort of delivery pizza, a wry reminder that even the grandest plans are no match for oppressive heat and endless queues. The experience on that vast artificial island prompted a question. What kind of incredible ambition built this place, and what happens when that ambition runs out? Next time, we explore the economic boom and spectacular bust that shaped the very ground beneath our feet. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Shinkansen and Sensibility. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. Continuing our journey on the Rise the Limit, we turn to Chapter 13, Icarus Flies with Osaka's Bubble. After leaving the modern-day frustrations of the Expo, we look back to an era of unbridled optimism, examining how Japan's 1980s boom funded the extravagant architectural reinvention of Osaka's waterfront. We will see how these postmodern landmarks born from economic ambition have adapted in the decades since the bubble's collapse. Icarus Flies with Osaka's Bubble. Gold-spurred wild towers, then bust a hotel wonders, now chic for Expo. Futures fatigue, the flawed function of a fair. My eyelids felt gritty at 4:30 a.m., a familiar sensation after a week of vacation-grade exhaustion. I watched the sun come up over Osaka, a city that looked surprisingly lovely from a distance, before the crowds arrived to spoil the view. We got to the park gates later than the day before, moving with the grim determination of seasoned veterans. We were here to see the future. And the future, apparently, requires you to get up before dawn. First, we ducked into a few minor pavilions. The Sky Mobility exhibit was an exercise in institutional disappointment. It was supposed to feature a functional fleet of electric person-carrying drones, the kind of flying car future promised by every cartoon since the 1960s. Instead, we got an mock-up and a sign boldly claiming you could ride one from a company called Joby in September. The Japanese authorities, it seems, had questions, like, "Are you sure?" Next door, the joint pavilion for Latvia and Lithuania was a small walk-through affair that delivered a surprisingly sharp and well-executed concept. It was a stark contrast to the Cambodian pavilion, a beige box of such profound unoriginality that I couldn't even be bothered to raise my phone for a picture. Then it was on to the main event, our timed reservation for the Persona Natureverse. Now, Persona is an HR staffing agency. They find temporary office workers for a living. By the looks of their pavilion, they are making an absolute fortune doing it. For reasons that defy all earthly logic, their building was shaped like a giant nautilus shell, and inside were several more smaller nautilus shells. It was like a Russian nesting doll designed by a marine biologist with a corporate expense account. The centerpiece was not a celebration of finding people jobs, but a cloned heart, grown with pluripotent stem cells. This biological machine, suspended in a case, would contract when they zapped it with electricity. The next room featured a strange monolith surrounded by exhibits on remote surgery. After a quick lecture on the microbiome, the monolith began to twitch and shift, putting on a show that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. We followed this with a visit to the Yoshimoto Pavilion, created by an artist whose entire body of work seemed dedicated to causing confusion and mild injury. It was full of simulators and systems designed not to be understood, but to be endured. To be fair, most of the expo felt engineered to maximize discomfort. For the first few hours of the morning, the grounds are pleasant, but by noon, the place becomes a solid river of humanity with nowhere to sit, a churning mass of shoulders and backpacks. We saw people still streaming in at 3 in the afternoon, arriving fresh-faced for their shift in the standing-in-line mines. I took a moment to admire the giant wooden ring that encircles the entire site, a handsome and completely useless piece of architecture. For lunch, I paid $30 for a doner kebab. This is a price that feels less like a transaction and more like a mugging in Japan, a country where you can typically eat very well for $10. We shuffled through the Turkish pavilion, which was forgettable. But the Korean pavilion next door was a stunner. An AI composed a song using audience input, and then you walked through a room of big, smoky bubbles drifting down from the ceiling. The main show was a K-pop narrative about a girl who finds her late grandfather's phone and finishes his classical composition, turning it into a pop hit. It was so well produced and genuinely moving that it almost made me forget the crowds. Almost. Our luck ran out at Luxembourg. After waiting over an hour to see what Luxembourg had to say for itself, the answer was not much. The only memorable feature was a room where you could lie on a giant net while scenes of the country played on the walls. After that, every queue I saw looked like a life sentence. That's when I hit the wall. Everything required a reservation made through an app so badly designed it looked like a high schooler's 1996 web project. For a country that produces some of the most sophisticated technology on the planet, Japan's public-facing IT can be a baffling letdown. This wasn't just a quirk, it was a fundamental failure. We have one more day and one more reservation. I came here wanting to be the kind of person who jets off to World Expos, a sophisticated global citizen taking the planet's temperature. The reality is this system, as it stands, is broken. Maybe they should have sold reservations or just tripled the ticket price. All I know is that not even the Japanese, a people who seem to possess a bottomless capacity for patient queuing, could possibly think this is working. I can only hope the Saudis have a better plan for the next one. Portside Prince. Remaking a regency for a new reign. What happens to a building when it has a personality crisis? We'd just escaped the human deluge of the Expo, a place so crowded I'm convinced I saw a man rent out his own shoulders for someone to sit on. Our hotel, the Grand Prince Osaka Bay, was a refuge. Until very recently, this place wasn't a prince at all. It had spent nearly 30 years as a Hyatt Regency, a perfectly respectable, if somewhat bland, member of international hotel society. Then, in 2023, it went through a full-blown midlife crisis. It dumped Hyatt, changed its name to Prince, and got a new Japanese driver, the Seibu Group. This was all a strategic move for the upcoming Expo, which is corporate speak for slapping a new coat of paint on the building to attract Japanese tourists who trust the Prince name. It's the hotel equivalent of your dad showing up to a family barbecue in a convertible and a new earring. This also meant my dream of racking up points as a globe-trotting Hyatt member, the sophisticated Expo baller I imagined myself becoming, was dead on arrival. My loyalty was now worldless currency in a foreign kingdom. But the identity swap wasn't even the strangest part. The hotel apparently decided monogamy was boring and entered into a polyamorous relationship with another brand. A chunk of the building, 64 rooms to be exact, is now also operating as Rizonare Osaka, a family-focused resort from the Hoshino Group. It's a hospitality turducken, a fancy family resort stuffed inside a 5-star business hotel. Two entirely different hotel philosophies are duking it out under one very large, confused roof. This whole grand, slightly schizophrenic enterprise sits on the waterfront, a monument to the same ambitious planning that gave us the Expo itself and the slowly sinking Kansai airport. It was born during a boom time when Osaka was building man-made islands and sprawling convention centers with the supreme confidence that people would flock to them. Standing at the window, looking out over the concrete and water of the Nanko district, it all made a weird kind of sense. The building wasn't having a crisis, it was simply being a product of its environment, bold, brash, and built to order. Forged foreshore, building a bold bayside future. The city is a collage of signs and stories. Paul Auster, City of Glass. Our new hotel wasn't the only thing around here having an identity crisis. It had recently shed its skin as a Hyatt to become a Grand Prince, while simultaneously subletting a few dozen rooms to another resort brand entirely. Looking out our window at Osaka Bay, I could see this same eclectic spirit had infected the entire waterfront. The whole place felt like it was assembled from a kit of parts that weren't originally sold together. A giant Ferris wheel loomed over an aquarium shaped like a massive block of Lego, all of it built on land that, until recently, was just water. This whole district is a monument to Japan's bubble economy, a giddy period in the late 1980s when the country had so much money, it started making some questionable home improvement decisions on a national scale. It was a time for bold statements, and the main statement here in the Tempozan Harbour Village seems to have been, what if we built a theme park but forgot the rides? The centerpiece of this grand vision is a replica of Christopher Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria. A purpose-built sightseeing boat, it offers 45-minute cruises around the bay. There is a cosmic, chef's kiss level of irony in this. Japan, a key part of the Asia that Columbus failed to find, has built a copy of his ship to sail in circles around a man-made island. In his book on the subject, The Bubble Economy, Christopher Wood describes the era as one where Japan was behaving as if it had discovered the secret of perpetual economic motion. That secret apparently involved building one of the world's largest aquariums, the Kaiyukan, which houses a whale shark and guides visitors on a tour of the Pacific's Ring of Fire. It sits next to the Tempozan giant Ferris wheel, which opened in 1997 and briefly held the title of world's tallest, like a retired boxer still proud of his belt. Nearby, a monumental inverted cone building by the famous architect Tadao Ando once held a Suntory museum. It closed, later reopening as the Osaka Culturarium, a name that sounds like it should be growing something in a petri dish. This penchant for creation extends to the very ground beneath our feet. For centuries, Osakans have been reclaiming land from the bay, a shallow basin averaging about 90 feet deep. The granddaddy of these projects is Kansai International Airport, plopped on an artificial island so ambitious it has been sinking steadily since it opened. Engineers apparently solve this with an ingenious system of jacks under the terminal, periodically hoisting the whole building up like a car needing an oil change. Now they've built another island nearby called Umeshima, or Dream Island, for the 2025 World Expo. It's a lovely name, though one hopes the dream isn't the kind where you're giving a presentation and realize you've forgotten to wear pants. After the expo, it's going to be a casino. It all fits the character of a city that gave us instant noodles, conveyor belt sushi, and a building with a highway running through its 5th, 6th, and 7th floors. The city's history is one of pragmatic commerce, not imperial ceremony. If you need more land, you make it. If you need a new airport, you build it in the water. If you need a tourist attraction, you build a copy of a lost explorer's ship and charge for tickets. Fevered forms, forging the fortunes of bubble-era buildings. "I still don't get the boat," my wife said. Staring out the window of our hotel. From our room in the Grand Prince, we had a perfect view of the Tempozan harbour village, a view I'd been studying since we arrived. I understand the aquarium and the Ferris wheel, but why is a replica of Christopher Columbus's ship sailing around Osaka Bay? "It's postmodern," I said, with the confidence of a man who had just learned the term an hour ago. "It's weird," she countered. "And that other building, the one that looks like a giant funnel. That's weird too." She was right. The architecture of the bay, like the Umeda Sky building we'd seen earlier, had a specific brand of strangeness. It felt like it was designed by people who had just been told that money was no longer a real thing. As it turns out, for a brief period in Japan, it wasn't. The whole story starts, as many strange stories do, with a bunch of finance ministers in a hotel. In 1985, at the Plaza Hotel in New York, the United States convinced Japan and a few other countries to intentionally weaken the US dollar. This caused the Japanese yen to shoot up in value, which sounds great unless you're a country that makes its living selling things to other countries. Suddenly, Japanese exports were facing a steep price hike. To prevent the economy from stalling, the Bank of Japan did the only thing it could think of. It turned on the money hose. Interest rates were slashed, and a tsunami of cheap money, as it's been called, washed over the nation. But this cash, now ridiculously easy to borrow, didn't go into building more car factories. It went straight into a nationwide gambling spree on stocks and real estate. An almost religious belief took hold. Land in Japan can never, ever lose value. This was the financial equivalent of believing you can survive a fall from a plane by flapping your arms really hard on the way down. The results were glorious and insane. Between 1985 and 1989, the stock market tripled. The fever pitch of this delusion was a single famous statistic that still sounds like a lie. At its peak, the plot of land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was supposedly worth more than all the real estate in the entire state of California. Think about that. The home of the Emperor versus Hollywood, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and every last vineyard in Napa. One patch of Tokyo dirt against a state with the fifth largest economy in the world. When companies are sitting on assets that valuable, they get confident. And when confident people have access to endless, cheap money, they start building things. Architects were handed budgets that were essentially blank checks and told to create monuments to success. The result was an explosion of Japanese postmodernism, a style that was flashy, funny, and occasionally just plain bizarre. This is where all the weirdness we saw around the bay comes from. The Suntory Museum, that building my wife called a giant funnel, was designed by the famous Tadao Ando as a spectacular inverted cone. The Umeda Sky Building, with its donut hole observatory connecting two towers, was meant to look like a city floating in the air. Even the artificial island that holds Kansai Airport was a product of this era's swagger. The most expensive civil works project in history at the time. And that replica of the Santa Maria sailing around the harbour. That was the ultimate postmodern flex, taking a symbol of old-world discovery and turning it into a tourist ride in a futuristic port. It was history repurposed as a theme park attraction, paid for with money nobody ever really had. The whole waterfront was a collage of architectural victory laps from a race that was about to end in a massive pile-up because, of course, the music had to stop. In the early 1990s, the bubble didn't just leak. It burst with spectacular force. The belief that land prices would never fall was proven spectacularly wrong. The tsunami of cheap money receded, leaving behind a stagnant economy, a lot of debt, and some very interesting buildings. Financial genius is before the fall. John Kenneth Galbraith, A Short History of Financial Euphoria. Calculated crash, from financial collapse to concrete calm. Staring up at the shimmering glass and steel of Osaka Bay, it's hard to imagine the party ever stopping. The buildings conceived in the late 80s stand like monuments to a time when money was not an object so much as a suggestion. An era of boundless confidence had produced architecture that was part building, part fever dream. But all bubbles, whether they're made of soap or speculative real estate, eventually meet a pin. Japan's pin arrived in late 1989, wielded by the steady hand of its own central bank. Alarmed that asset prices had achieved orbit, the Bank of Japan started hiking interest rates. This was the financial equivalent of a bartender yelling "last call" and turning on all the lights. The immediate results were spectacular. The Nikkei stock index, which had only ever known the direction up, plunged so fast it probably got the bends, losing nearly half its value in a year. Real estate, once considered more reliable than gravity, began what experts called a long, slow, and painful decline. This meant that the Imperial Palace grounds were suddenly worth less than California again, which must have been a great relief to the emperor, who probably didn't want the hassle of selling. The fallout left companies and banks suffocating under mountains of bad debt. This gave rise to one of the greatest terms in economic history: zombie banks. These were institutions that were, for all intents and purposes, dead. They just didn't have the decency to lie down. I imagine it was a strange time to be a depositor. These zombies shambled through the economy for years, prolonging the stagnation that became known as the Lost Decade. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, the 1997 Asian financial crisis arrived like a dinner guest who brought a plague of locusts as a housewarming gift. Japanese banks, having lent heavily to their now struggling neighbors, watched their balance sheets get shredded. This culminated in the collapse of major firms like Yamaichi Securities, which didn't just shake public confidence, it threw it off a cliff. the architectural world felt the hangover just as badly. The demand for expensive, flashy postmodern buildings evaporated overnight. The style, so tied to the boom, suddenly looked like a ridiculous historical document from a lost civilization. The architectural conversation shifted from celebrating success to simply surviving. It turns out that when your financial system is populated by the undead, you favor buildings that are a bit more restrained and minimalist. The era of building giant inverted cones for fun was not about to make a comeback. Pop-up palaces, the fleeting fortune of Japanese postmodernism. The economic crash I'd learned about had slammed the brakes on Japan's architectural party, ending an era of wild spending with the financial equivalent of a bucket of ice water to the face. But that only raised a more interesting question. What kind of party had it been, exactly? What sort of collective thinking leads a society to build a corporate headquarters for a beer company that looks like it could double as a Decepticon's summer home? The answer, I was learning, was something called postmodernism. Postmodernism, as best as I can figure it, is a philosophy based on the sneaking suspicion that reality is a bit of an inside joke that no one quite gets. It starts with the simple, brain-melting idea that there is no single objective truth, only a bunch of smaller subjective truths bumping into each other. From there, it encourages taking things apart to see how they're made, a process academics call deconstruction, which seems to be a fancy term for proving a stop sign is secretly about the decline of the Ottoman Empire if you argue hard enough. The main takeaway is that everything is up for grabs, which gives you permission to be ironic, playful, and mix high culture with low culture, like putting ketchup on a $50 steak. It's what gives the world both Quentin Tarantino movies, where timelines are shuffled like a deck of cards, and Andy Warhol's soup cans, which bravely asked, what if art was just groceries? This philosophy might sound like a fun way to annoy your college professors, but it's something else entirely when you give it an unlimited budget and a city to play with. Japan's bubble economy in the late 1980s was the perfect storm. The country had what was described as boundless confidence and extravagant budgets, a polite way of saying everyone had lost their minds and was paying for it with money that might as well have been printed for a board game. Companies flush with cash wanted buildings that didn't just say, "We're successful," but screamed it through a megaphone from the top of a chrome-plated unicorn. Modernism, with its boring glass boxes and sensible concrete, was out. In its place came buildings that wore their historical references like costume jewelry, full of bold colors, weird angles, and a sense of humor. The entire redevelopment of Osaka's waterfront at Tempozan Harbor Village is like a monument to this idea. You have a world-class aquarium next to a giant Ferris wheel, which is just down the way from a full-scale replica of Christopher Columbus's Santa Maria offering bay cruises. Putting a copy of a 15th-century Spanish vessel in modern Japan to sell tickets for a harbor tour is the kind of absurd, context-free gesture postmodernism lives for. When the bubble burst, the hangover was immediate. People woke up, looked at these strange, expensive, and often impractical buildings, and felt a deep sense of buyer's remorse. These structures became easy targets, dismissed as dated, kitschy symbols of a wasteful and delusional time. Shin Takamatsu's Kirin Plaza, that menacing tower of metal and light, was torn down, an act some now consider a cultural tragedy. But a funny thing happened on the way to the scrapyard. The more time passed, the more these buildings started to look less like embarrassments and more like invaluable historical documents. Critics now argue they perfectly capture the unique optimism and creative energy of a very specific moment. It's a strange paradox. The architecture that was built on irony, playfulness, and a disregard for objective reality has become the most honest and authentic record of the glorious, misguided, and utterly unique fantasy Japan was living in. The story of Osaka's Bay is a cycle of boom, bust, and rebranding, proving that even monuments to financial excess can find a steady new purpose. But what happens when the grand spectacle is a letdown? Next time, we trade the sprawling expo for an intimate table and find that Japan's genius for classification is sometimes most satisfying when applied to a single, perfect piece of beef. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Shinkansen and Sensibility. And if you want to come behind the scenes, get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. On this episode of The Rise the Limit, we examine Chapter 14, The Fifth Taste of Farewell, where a cultural drive for precise category shapes a final meal. The same Japanese impulse that scientifically identified umami, the fifth taste, also created the strict grading and branding for prized Wagyu beef, turning a simple family dinner into a perfectly defined farewell to Osaka.